Whitby is a tourist town on the northeast coast of England, dating back to at least the 7th century AD. It's a small town with a booming tourist industry, just a few miles from the city of York, and a similarly populated tourist town of Scarborough. It also provides access to the North York Moors and isn't too far from the unique waxwork museum of Eden Camp. As with any old town in England, it has a long history, and in this region there's a connection to the Viking invasions, as well as one of the country's most famous abbeys. But it is also famous for its supernatural legacy. The Western Lighthouse. Situated at the end of a pier, providing excellent views in normal weather. But in stormy weather, this area becomes quite treacherous. One story has it that on a particularly stormy night, a brave lighthouse keeper rushed up the stairs when he noticed the lamp wasn't working. He managed to fix it but failed to notice the slippery steps, and upon his descent fell, tumbling down the stairs, snapping and breaking bones as he went, dying in a heap at the foot of the steps. Since then, visitors have reported seeing a spectral entity lying at the foot of the steps or racing toward the top in an effort to continually ensure the light stays lit. As we move down through the town, past the strip of arcades, boats moored waiting to set sail with eager tourists, we come to the old swing bridge that stops traffic and people several times a day to open up and allow boats through. Across the bridge there is a smaller, older area of town that leads through winding cobbled streets and narrow alleyways. Before we continue on our journey, we need to stop here at Grape Lane. Grape likely comes from an earlier word, the Old English word spelt grap, apparently pronounced frap, meaning grope. Some suggest it simply implied having to grope around in the dark, others suggesting it was the name due to the sex trade operated from the alley, with the sexual connotations of grope going back to at least the 14th century. But our story on Grape Lane is sadly far darker. According to some sources, the year is 1917. Mary Clark is a young girl living with her family here in Whitby. She ventures regularly to the baker's on Grape Lane, making her way along the dark and twisting lane with her father's dinner to be heated. The jolly baker welcomes the regular visitor and ushers her over to the oven. Mary happily makes her way over with her father's food and places it inside. The baker, his back turned, is suddenly shaken to his core by a bone-chilling scream. As he turns around, he sees a terrifying sight. Mary Clark, engulfed in flames, her hair rapidly disappearing in the conflagration as she runs out into the street, a fireball hurtling down the lane before she collapses, onlookers desperately beating out the flames with their hands. Still breathing, she's rushed to the local infirmary where she succumbs to her injuries, her ghost forever walking the darkened corners of Grape Lane, with visitors first being alerted to burning flesh before a child on fire appears, staring them dead in the eye. You can escape the ghost of Mary Clark by following the small and narrow roads and streets through the town, coming to a set of old stone steps. There are 100 of these taking you up to the beautiful view of the town and to the church of St. Mary the Virgin. So I'm here at St. Mary's Church here in Whitby, and this particular graveyard and church is associated with one particular ghost story that doesn't have much of an explanation as to the reason behind it. The ghost story goes a little bit like this. On a dark, cold night, people from the other world, ghosts, gather around the front door entrance to the church. At that point, a ghostly carriage turns up to collect them and take them on their way. The actual origins of this story and where it comes from are a little unclear. I can't find any information that suggests where the carriage came from, where it's going, or the type of people that it's picking up and taking with it. But I've always enjoyed the idea of ghosts and spectral carriages, just like the one in Edinburgh that thunders down the Royal Mile. Now, the real reason I brought you here is not for this church, it's for what's next to the church, the far greater, older and ruinous Abbey. Whitby Abbey dates back to the 7th century. Once home to monks, it was destroyed in the 16th century when King Henry VIII had a bit of a meltdown because the Pope wouldn't let him get a divorce, so he split from the church, butchered monks, burned abbeys, and helped kickstart hundreds of years of bitter rivalry and violence just so he could get a divorce from his first wife and marry Anne Boleyn. A classic love story. The Abbey is one of the better preserved ruins in England and is popular with tourists and visitors. It also has its own ghost story or two, and our first has echoes of Edgar Allan Poe. Many centuries ago, Whitby Abbey housed both monks and nuns, in separate quarters, of course. One such nun was Sister Constance de Beverley. She became the mistress of a knight or a soldier, breaking her vows of chastity. Instead of simply excommunicating her, kicking her out of the convent and having done with it, the abbess decides there is only one just punishment. She is to be immured in a wall within the abbey, bricked up alive for her sins. She screamed for days and days, her voice becoming weaker and raspier, but still she bellowed until finally the screaming stopped. But since that day, and beyond the fall of the abbey, her ghostly screams continue to be heard, intermixed with her pleading for forgiveness and to be released from the darkness. Constance is joined by St. Hilda, the founder of the abbey who, though dying elsewhere, is said to continue watching over the site from windows up above, seen standing on landings that no longer exist. But it is probably the story of Dracula for which the abbey and Whitby is best known. The story of Dracula is fairly well known. An elderly count from Transylvania turns out to be a centuries-old vampire who makes his way to England only to be stopped at the last minute by Van Helsing. Thanks to Hollywood, most people probably assume that when Dracula touches down in England as part of the story, it was actually London where he set foot. That isn't actually true. It was changed for the Hollywood adaptations of the movies, probably because Hollywood assumed no one would know where Whitby was, because it was in Whitby where the Demeter bought Count Dracula. So when the Demeter was wrecked on the coast of Whitby, Dracula turned himself into a dangerous supernatural dog and charged up these steps into the abbey. It's there where he has his final confrontation with Van Helsing. The town has embraced Dracula, and he has become a character strongly associated with Whitby. The Dracula experience has stood here for decades. I remember first visiting it with my grandparents in the early 90s. The Dracula experience isn't all, as twice a year the Goths of Great Britain descend upon their spiritual home for the largest festival of its kind. Thousands of people in dark clothes, makeup, and with a fascination with all things gothic and spooky come here. No idea why I feel such a connection to the place. There are, of course, more ghost stories connected with the town, ghostly oyster catchers, pirate phantoms, and the decapitated hand of Gloria among the many tales. But ghost stories are about more than just truth and historical fact. They're really about us, our fears, our ability to have empathy for those suffering, especially when perceived as good, a child, a hero, a woman of God. Whether the people behind them really existed is for historians. The ghosts are for the storytellers.